Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here on behalf of MediaSmarts. Welcome to our third annual Researching Digital Media Literacy in Canada event on establishing support and well-being for researchers who work online. My name is Cara Brisson-Boyven. I am the Director of Research for MediaSmarts, Canada's nonprofit Centre for Digital Media Literacy. This event is taking place as part of our 18th annual Media Literacy Week, which began here in Canada and has now sort of taken root across the world in different places. But we're really proud to have been the sort of founders of this event, and we're so excited for the week ahead and many of the events that are going on this week. I just want to take a moment to thank our partners. Without their support, this event and Media Literacy Week simply would not have happened. So a sincere thank you to Amazon, Bell, Meta, TelusWise, TikTok Canada, and YouTube for their dedication to digital media literacy education. We also want to thank the many teacher organizations and university departments nationwide who continue to support our mission and commitment to developing and strengthening digital media literacy in Canada. I'd like to thank our partners at the Internet, Technology, and Digital Sociology Research Cluster of the Canadian Sociological Association for co-hosting this event with us today. And thank you for joining us as we continue this important discussion on establishing support and well-being for researchers working online. The goal of today's conversation will be to consider the challenges of online research as seen from different perspectives within the university, to identify the digital media literacy needs on all levels, and consider potential steps that can be taken to support this continued challenge in research. While we meet here on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we are each located. I'm joining you from the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Chippewa peoples. My MediaSmarts colleagues, Vanessa and Khadija, are joining you today from unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And we'd invite you to take a moment to reflect on the territory that you're joining us from. If you'd like, then you can share that acknowledgement in the chat. Meeting on a virtual platform provides us with an opportunity to reflect on the lands occupied by the servers needed to host this technology, and on the lands that have been mined for the minerals and materials needed to build the devices and technological tools that we are all using to join today's panel. At MediaSmarts, we strive to ground our research processes in care and reciprocity, and this includes being in a constant state of learning, especially when it comes to understanding the digital well-being and experiences of Indigenous peoples and communities across Canada. We commit to creating and maintaining respectful processes and relationships that recognize and strive to address power imbalances across the digital media literacy landscape. So we invite you today to communicate with the panelists. We will have a Q&A portion during the panel today, where you can either ask questions in the chat, or if you'd like, you can use the raise hand function and unmute yourself. Our moderator for today, who I'll introduce in just a moment, will moderate that Q&A session. It will happen at the end of our discussion. So we ask you to hold on to those questions if you can until then, but we will invite you to engage with our panelists at that time. Closed captioning is also available, so you can activate that by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button on your tool bar if that's helpful for you. And I just wanted to take a brief moment to give a little bit of an introduction to MediaSmarts in case this is the first time that you've engaged with us. So MediaSmarts is a nonprofit charitable organization for digital media literacy. For over 27 years, we've been advancing digital media literacy in Canadian schools, homes, and communities. We conduct and disseminate original research that contributes to the development of our internationally recognized educational programs and resources, and informs public policy on issues related to digital media. Our vision is for everyone to have the skills and knowledge to critically engage with media in all forms. And we achieve this through leadership in advancing digital media literacy, as I said, through research, education, public engagement, and outreach. At MediaSmarts, our educational resources, public awareness campaigns, and policy recommendations are grounded in the best available evidence pertaining to digital media literacy. In collaboration and consultation with various partners, our research team specializes in designing and facilitating both qualitative and quantitative research projects and conducting robust evaluations of all of our educational programs and resources. Research at MediaSmarts would not be possible without community members and organizations who guide and support our work and call on our expertise to return the favor. We sit on many advisory committees for projects across the country, and we're always looking for new opportunities to collaborate with others in the digital media literacy field. Our panel today features 4 accomplished researchers who will be introduced shortly, and our panelists are going to engage in a moderated roundtable discussion on the challenges of conducting and mobilizing research online. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today our moderator. Milana Leskavec is a first-year PhD student at Queen's University. Her research interests lie at the intersection of social media content moderation and the production of public knowledge. During last year's Media Literacy Week, alongside fellow graduate students, she participated in a panel about the opportunities and challenges of being online as a researcher, and we're thrilled to have her moderate a continuation of that conversation this year. So Milana, I'm really happy to pass the mic off to you.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that really warm welcome. Welcome everybody to the session today. First, we'll start off by just going around having everybody introduce themselves. And then if you want to share some initial thoughts on the importance of supporting students and researchers who conduct and disseminate research online. And then we'll get into the more specific questions. So I'll call on each of you and we can start off with Katie.
Hey, hi everyone. My name's Katie Mendes. I'm Associate Professor at Western University. I'm also the Canada Research Chair in Inequality and Gender. So I'm a feminist scholar and I study issues on sensitive topics, namely experiences of sexual and gender-based violence and how people use digital technologies to disclose them. So I spent a lot of time reading tweets on things like Me Too, or there's a whole range of other spaces where people disclose experiences of sexual violence. So this also means that I attract students who are interested in these topics, and they spend a lot of time studying a lot of online content that talks about sensitive material. And I don't want to assume that just because something's sensitive doesn't necessarily mean that it's harmful. But I'm also very aware that, when you're immersed in these spaces for a long time, it can be quite traumatizing and triggering, especially if, you have some experiences such as the one that you're studying. I'm also really excited to talk about the ways that as academics, we're expected to have this visibility and, go online and disseminate our research, and especially for women, marginalized groups, about how it's very, very easy to get trolled and attacked just for the fact that you are speaking, with the feminist voice or kind of a female presenting voice, or a queer voice. So, these are things that I'm really excited to talk about. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll go with Stuart next.
My apologies, I should have had that unmuted. Thank you, Milena. It's fantastic to be here. I'm grateful to Kara for the invitation and the warm welcome that you presented. I'll introduce myself in a moment, but I'll just begin by noting that I'm coming to you from the traditional ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, in the land that is sometimes called by Squamish people Kemkemalai, or Vancouver is how many of you will know it. I'm at Simon Fraser University here, and I must tell you that the cold has begun to hit, and so I'm a bit shivery this morning, and I apologize, or my morning at any rate. I'm really quite excited about our conversation today. I am the director of the School of Communication as well as a professor here, and also the director of a research institute at SFU called the Office of the Community Engaged Research Initiative. And in my research and my scholarship are at the intersection of youth studies, digital literacy and media education, and urban space. And in many ways, looking at how online research and our presence online has been shaped or is shaped by new circumstances and conditions today is something that, as director of the school, I'm regularly encountering with colleagues and scholars who are online and whose work, as Katie has already noted, when it engages with controversial issues, immediately becomes the object of attention and often attack. And this becomes the site then of individual and collective conversations. And one of the areas that I want to share with and talk about today, I'm hoping, is how we can think about responses to the new online vulnerabilities that are before us in terms of collective forms of response. Because it seems to me many times we are put in a position of individualizing our responsibility and our care in the face of violence and threat that's online. I also think that as academics, we face certain kinds of threats online. We have institutions that we are part of, which often do not come up to task. Nonetheless, they are part of our infrastructure. And I think the community organizations that many of us work with and are engaged with and care about deeply often face these circumstances from a place of greater precarity, less support, and the need for more resources. And so I'm hoping our conversation can tie into the particular needs of organizations that are outside of large institutional bodies like universities, like schooling boards, schooling systems more generally. Because I think those settings are really experience very particular kinds of vulnerability that need our attention. Last, what I'll say is I'm also excited to talk about some of the opportunities that online research affords us. I think Katie marks very well the pressure many of us are under to be to create an online presence. Part of that development, though, has led to new forms of knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing that I think are quite exciting and worth holding in this space as we think about the vulnerabilities that are part of our work and our relationships with each other. So thanks. I'm really excited to be with you all.
Great, thank you for that. We'll go with Mohana next.
Thank you, Milana. Hi, everyone. I am Mohana, and I'm going to speak from two roles that I'm currently engaged with as an early career researcher and as an early career educator. So first of all, I am joining from Washington, D.C. So you're going to hear a lot of silence and violence moving around here, but sorry about that. And I do research on cyber risks facing youth and what are the types of risk teens fall vulnerable. I try to understand from the perspectives of Canadian K-12 educators. So that was my PhD research, which I recently graduated last year from University of Calgary. So I looked into what are some of the factors that teens fall vulnerable when they are using digital spaces. And one of the factors that my educator participants highlighted was safeguarding their privacy that often leads to identity theft. Now, as an early career educator and taking classes using digital mediums and giving assignments to them where they have to submit their work through digital mediums, I'm able to understand how to strike a balance, or rather, there's a struggle or challenge that I'm facing to, keep a balance between safeguarding the privacy of my students and myself and how to prevent those ethical misconduct that takes place in the digital medium. So that's something I'm kind of interested in sharing in our conversation today. In addition to cyber risk, I also do research on restorative justice and how that could be used as a method to mitigating problems associated with cyber-mediated risk-facing teens. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And lastly, we'll have Javed introduce himself.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I am looking forward to a vigorous discussion and sharing of information here. I am the professor as well as a dean at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. I'm based in St. George, but our faculty is 3 campus faculty. We have faculty in Mississauga as well as Scarborough. And you know, I come probably among my colleagues, I come from more of the computing and data science perspective. And so one of my research areas actually is research informatics, or cyber infrastructure for research. So I have worked on projects to facilitate large-scale data-intensive research using innovative technologies and tools. Recent times, I would say last 6, 7 years, I've been focusing intensively on health informatics and healthcare research. And some of the challenges that if I get a chance to elaborate on, I will talk about that from a research informatics perspective we deal with is it's the acronym we typically use is FAIR. FAIR stands for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data. And so key dimensions for facilitating research increasingly rely on having access to accurate, reusable, findable, interoperable data. So we work on projects around that. Interestingly, I've been also focusing intensively on healthcare research and developing infrastructure and tools for supporting healthcare research, which leads to a lot of other big challenges, as you can imagine, including governance of that data and balancing privacy, sensitivity with research access and promotion of research and facilitation of research. So if I get a chance, I'll talk about data governance and regulations around data as well, and how do we tackle that in using healthcare maybe as a problem site. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. All right, so I'll just jump into the first question right away here. So for all levels of the university ecosystem, there is an increasing requirement to do research online, or at the very least, disseminate research online. So from your perspective, are you feeling this shift? And what are some key challenges you have experienced or observed related to the increased frequency of doing or disseminating research online? And to mix it up a little bit, I'm going to start this time with Mohana.
So to start with, like I mentioned earlier, that I'm an early career researcher and an early career educator. So I'm working in George Washington University as a visiting faculty. So visiting faculty comes with certain advantages where I'm given an opportunity to teach a course about cyber criminology. That's my research interest. So that's interesting. But the disadvantage is because I'm a visiting faculty, I don't get much pressure in regards to conducting research online or publishing that, so disseminating research. So I am not getting any direct pressure per se from an educator perspective. But as a researcher, I'm in the job market, which also means that I'm looking aggressively for jobs in the academic field. And there's a set of expectations where I may have to meet the publication criteria in order to get a job. So from a researcher, an early career researcher, I have this expectations that requires me to disseminate. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I will be sharing my experiences as a researcher and as an educator. So from a researcher perspective, I would say I am doing or conducting research as an individual. So I don't have any research budget. That also means that I cannot really contribute or pay for journals, that high impact factor journals that have high publication fees. So there's a barrier right there, which I feeling as a challenge. On the other side, Another challenges I would say is mostly structural in a way when I see from the educator perspective. So I am teaching a course this semester, which is a course on cybercriminology and youth, where I am discussing with my students about some of the challenges that they face when using digital device. And interestingly, most of them talked about identity theft, because it's a requirement from the university that is completing an assignment, which is subjective. So giving the opportunity to the students to reflect on a topic that they subjectively or personally connect to. And it's a course on cybercriminology, so they choose a topic on social media application, right? So they're writing, some of them even highlights personal details and some of their personal attributes. And they're using Google Doc to kind of share or disseminate those research. And it's a requirement of the university. So when they're sharing those assignments, some of them having some personal details, it's also a question of their privacy safeguard. And we all know Google Scholar or Google document or doc has some question in regards to safeguarding and privacy. So how do I really balance? Like here, it's a challenge as an educator to support or safeguard their privacy, because I have some of my students who have talked about some of the personal stories that they faced on the digital, that they felt a victim of a digital crime or a digital risk. So they're sharing it in Google Doc, whose information is given to other unauthorized individuals. I don't know who they are. So these are some of the challenges I felt as an early career educator, especially to strike or find a balance to save my students their privacy, at the same time meeting my role, the expectation that the university has on me as an educator, because I am just meeting my expectations. The submission of the assignment is a part of the structural expectation of the university. Now, when moving on to my researcher's role, where, like I said, I am in the job market area, I am aggressively looking for job applications. So when I'm applying for the job, there's a requirement of publication category. And it has to be, some of them have focuses on high impact factor journal. To be honest with you, digital area or digital services is not always negative. Like for instance, we have joined from different parts of Canada and different parts of the country in just by clicking one switch or by pressing one thing. So it has its own advantages that requires embracing. But when I look about much more critically from the accessibility, from my perspective or stand, there's a barrier. For instance, I don't get research budget to kind of meet those high prices this high impact factor journal has. But at the same time, I need to meet the expectation to get a job. So there's a struggle, a challenge I face as an early career educator.
Thank you for that. And yeah, thank you for providing both of those perspectives. That's really interesting. And hopefully the next question will kind of spark some conversation around approaches to those challenges as well. So yeah, we'll go with Javed next, and then.
Yeah, so I would say there is significant pressure to go online and conduct research online. It's coming from a number of sources and number of factors. Part of it is the way information of high quality, as my colleague Mohana mentioned, high impact journals and publications, increasingly to be able to discover even the appropriate research exists for you to go and access, you need online tools to do searches, to do the discovery work. And then upon finding the right content, often you find libraries have decided to fully digitize all of the content and only make those content available online. This is a practice that has been taking place for a while now. And you see that resources, especially in the university context, it is not just because libraries want to do it, it's because of forces around how information sources are browsed and retrieved and used. Increasingly, their primary user groups are demonstrating through their practices. They don't come and browse the shelves anymore. They go online to find the full content. Libraries have now developed long-term storage policies where they remove the physical content from their primary buildings and places where you would find them, and put them in storage that are far away from those buildings, and you then have to access them through online tools. And so those pressures are there. And then in terms of dissemination, the forces that are at play is tremendous pressure on scholars to raise their visibility as quickly as possible, to get cited as many times as possible. There's a lot of weight being placed on just enumerating scholarship, and I think to an excessive level. Often people literally are being transformed to numbers, H-index, for example. And at one level you say, yes, sure, at some scale, those numbers may mean something, but we all know, especially in my field, in information field, we actually study, the field is called bibliometrics, in terms of what do citations really mean? What are the patterns, and how do they map to scholarship? We know that volume doesn't always mean quality. So in terms of citation counts. So there are problems, but there are societal and scholarly pressure to go online and get more citations and get more visible and disseminate things through different channels. So those pressures are there. So I will just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Katie?
Great, thanks. Well, as a sociologist and someone who comes from a media studies background, I'm actually quite excited about the opportunity to do research online, and it's often something I say to my students. Javed, you mentioned, there's so much data out there online, which I think is actually really exciting. But a challenge that I'm definitely seeing is actually around the ethics, and so through like institutional ethics boards, of not actually understanding the risks or harms of engaging with online research. So often you see ethics board assume that because the data is on Twitter or it's on Instagram, it's public, and therefore it's fair game. And again, because I do a lot of research around disclosure of sexual or gender-based violence, actually there's some really interesting debates happening about, should we be treating this data the same? And we have bodies like the Association of Internet Researchers. And in fact, we just had our conference last week in Philadelphia, where there were some really fantastic panels, like really thinking about the ethics around this. And so, it's not to say that there aren't discussions happening, there are. But often, even in research ethics board, I'm on the ethics committee at Western, we often see them thinking about the participant safety, and that is so important, but actually very little regard for the researcher safety, right? So what measures are we putting in place to make sure that people who are studying sensitive topics know where to go to for support? Are there communities of care where they can turn to? Are there other researchers who are studying these kind of sensitive topics that they can turn to for advice? So I think that there is not enough attention or care or thought about the support that researchers need. And again, I'm quite well established. I've been doing this for a long time. I have my networks. But if I think about my students, grad students, master's students, undergraduate students, I think that the supports for them aren't always put in place unless they have a supervisor who's experienced and knows to provide this for their students. I was also really interested in this discussion about the dissemination. Javed, you talked about there's this pressure to kind of be very visible. And Stuart, you mentioned earlier, there are many benefits to the push with being public facing. I think disseminating our research broadly is wonderful. But again, we also need institutional support for faculty and students who are doing this. And I can't even tell you how many cases I know of academics who are trolled. And often, they go to the universities for support. And unless there's some kind of threat to the university's reputation, they don't do much or anything about it. And so I think there needs to be much more institutional support for researchers who get trolled, who get harassed because they're doing research that when it benefits the university, they're super, super happy. But then, they're not there supporting the researcher when they're getting attacked or threatened. And I think, that's a big issue, and it's something institutions can actually change.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Katie. And Stuart.
Thank you. Wow, lots of interesting ideas already in circulation. I just want to remark on a couple of points already made. Katie's point about the capacity of institutions, universities, to act as support networks for faculty members and researchers, graduate students who are trolled is quite spotty. And I think what Katie reminds us about is there is a recent explosion of these kinds of threats, and many institutions, whilst they're publicly aware of them, once those dynamics start to play out and faculty members, graduate students get trolled, the ability to stop that or slow it down really challenges universities in a significant way. And I would say, I think one thing to keep in mind is that thinking about spam as something that is, and trolled emails and so on, as something that we might want to stop and eliminate, is not technologically that easy a process to engage. In fact, the harder you work at limiting those kind of trolling, that trolling communication, oftentimes the more one gets. And this becomes a circle that one falls into. And oftentimes technology departments at university will encourage you to go quiet as a way of managing spam, which seems like the most frustrating way of addressing what is a form of violence, quite honestly. I also want to acknowledge what Javid says about, noted about the increasing pressure to publish, which I don't think is surprising to anyone, but the consequence of that is that we're increasingly seeing developments like citation economies emerge, where young scholars are invited to pay for circles of others to quote their work in order to build up their H-index and reference point in ways that I think many of us would find a direct kind of violation of the spirit of academic freedom and knowledge development. And these sub-economies are becoming more and more common, and a tremendous pressure for colleagues like Mohana, who are coming into academic careers and seeing the pressure on them to take up a public space in particular ways, through citations, through various forms of knowledge mobilization. Drawing on that, I also want to note something else, which is that there's a labor implication to the pressure to be online, and the labor implication really is a workload issue. In order to be a public-facing figure, one needs to develop skills and extend the window of time one dedicates to moving one's work around, so that the expanded workload that comes from being an online researcher is often a kind of an invisible component of what happens with this work. And the pressure is something that one is encouraged to manage as an individual, not as a collective member of a community. And this becomes something that then really bears on one's pressure as one's trying to develop innovative research, to develop networks, as Katie has shared with us. The skilling up that's required to be in these spaces is often an invisible burden that we carry regardless of whatever technological backgrounds we bring with us. Some other things, though, that I want to highlight is the context collapse that Mohana pointed out, which is to say that the way in which our private and public lives become intertwined as part of online space, to which none of us are really surprised, I think, because online and offline lives have quite obviously become intertwined realities now. But the impact of that in the case of online research is such that it's very hard to manage or think about one's privacy in ways that allow that part of one's life to carry on without interference from one's public life. Context collapse in that is something that one then is constantly managing and making calculated judgments around, all in ways that are imperfect, are unsatisfying, and are often really defensive rather than trying to change the circumstances that are around us. There's other things I wanted to share. Maybe one last thing I'll say is that the draw and the allure of being an online researcher is deeply compelling today, for reasons that I do want to say more about, around the capacity to engage with multiple audiences. It does seem to me, however, that there is a way in which the focus on online spaces produces a kind of individualizing of our work, so that we increasingly are responsible for making ourselves into a kind of online personality and presence. And I want to acknowledge that there's an invitation to meet publics in a lot of different spaces, but a paradoxical individualizing of our responsibility for that work, which leaves one both drawn to new communities, but also isolated within one's academic community. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So yeah, in this next question, we're going to be shifting a little bit, and maybe if you do have, responses sort of to what others have touched on, disseminating research online, being trolled, privacy concerns, doing this sort of individual lonely work on one side. So based on all of that, how are you navigating this shift and working through the challenges with research online? And what are some approaches, practices, or support systems you have found helpful for yourself, or in the case of ministry and administrators and faculty here, for supporting students with doing online research? So we'll start with Javed.
Fascinating. I'm so glad to hear all of those perspectives. All of my colleagues are providing some really interesting and very important dimensions. And I'm glad to have Mohana in the mix, because it brings the early scholar, early research effort perspective, and how important that is to understand and nurture in this sort of advanced technology gone haywire era that we're living in. So, just to pick on a couple of things, what Stuart mentioned regarding the invisible upskilling and labor needed to become online and to effectively use platforms is an extremely important point. I cannot imagine, researchers and scholars that come from disciplines that are not inherently technological, how they maintain competitiveness and visibility and leverage platforms. Platforms, by definition, create barriers of their kind. And platforms, by definition, unfortunately, make you vulnerable in ways that sometimes you don't even realize, because they are essentially tracking you and monitoring you, and in many cases, leveraging you. So that side of making our scholars, our next generation researchers, aware and capable of engaging in platforms properly, appropriately, is a big gap, is a huge area. And Katie mentioned the ethical aspects that often get unnoticed and underappreciated. Very, very important dimension in terms of how we engage online. There are so many layers there in terms of people who put up data and content, their attention to ethical dimensions, people who are actually create the platforms and infrastructure, their ethical standards and their knowledge of ethics, as well as the consumers and the people who engage on those platforms to utilize data and disseminate data. Those dimensions are also require our attention. So with that, I'll just stop, and I will eagerly await my colleagues' reactions and responses. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Katie, we'll go with you next.
Hey, thanks for that. Some great points there, Javed. I think in terms of like how I navigate this, I guess I can think of it as kind of like two levels, like on the individual and then structural change. But I mean, even on the individual level, like I'm not navigating these spaces on my own. Communities of care is so important. And maybe I'm lucky because I work within feminist circles where this kind of like collective and care is something that I think is quite natural. I really liked how Stuart talked about the labor needed to cope with all of this. And Javed, you pointed that out as well. I think that's so incredibly important, thinking about who carries the burden, the heaviest burden. And it's often people who are already marginalized. So, being aware of that is incredibly important. And I was just in Philadelphia at the Association of Internet Researchers conference this week, and we were having these kinds of conversations about the importance for researchers to have digital defense skills, so knowing how to kind of keep their accounts secure, maybe having multiple accounts, kind of keeping their separate information private. I was talking to a colleague who is consistently doxxed. So every time she changes jobs, she's involved with different feminist movements. Her new university address is like posted on this website, and kind of the harassment that she gets. And so having to make a lot of steps to try to keep, her personal information not available. The importance of self-care. And again, sometimes these seem like individual activities, but they are actually, we often have these collectives where we share, where we kind of input, we help each other out. So that's been really important. In terms of structural change, that's harder, but it's not impossible. And for myself, I can think of things that I'm doing. Like I actually teach research methods. And so I spend a lot of time talking about ethics and online ethics. So kind of trying to instill questions and values into the next generation of scholars. I think that is something structurally that I can change. Again, the role I play on the ethics boards is bringing these ideas and debates into these spaces. Javed, you mentioned, not everybody is kind of studying tech. So how do we kind of make sure that people who are in maybe psychology or economics or kind of disciplines that aren't naturally curious about the media are thinking about these things? But I think getting institutions to support scholars is much, much more difficult. And, that would be like a wonderful structural change, but it's not something I feel that is easy to accomplish, or at least on my own. Again, it needs to go back to the collective. We need lots of people working together to kind of push for the change. And then we need institutions to recognize that there's value. And, I'm even thinking of, universities often don't make decisions that aren't in their best interest. So you have to convince you have to hit them where it hurts, right? Show them like why it would be good for them to invest in supporting scholars. And I don't have those skills necessarily to do it, but I know that there would be people who are able to do that. So I'm not completely hopeless against like broader institutional change. But there are things that I think that I can control, and that's what I try to focus on.
Great, thank you so much for that. I, for one, as a student, would definitely be interested in taking a digital defense course. So yeah, that would be really interesting. We'll go with Stuart next.
Thanks, Milena. I want to just echo that point that Katie introduced about digital defense skills. That has now become something that many of our doctoral students graduate into or move into as part of their programs, recognizing that these are a set of competencies that students whose work is beginning to find traction and find outlets discover that they really need to have as part of their apparatus of skills. And so Milena, I think you point to something that is increasingly becoming a kind of expectation in form of scaffolding that graduate programs need to provide to young scholars who are emerging into public realms in significant ways. I also want to say that other things that we have developed as ways of navigating skills we and I have developed is um, being very conscious of not falling prey to opportunities for ubiquitous publicity and to be very targeted and focused in the kind of research and work that one is sharing and putting out, so that one is, if you like, managing the boundaries of the kind of attention that one's getting. This is not in any way going to eliminate trolling and other kinds of violence online, but it is to say that there are spaces of work that one wants to be part of, recognizing the challenges that are part of that world and then building defenses and affordances around that, and then others that you're dragged into as part of being online. And it's that being dragged into debates and discussions and vulnerabilities that for many researchers becomes quite taxing, quite threatening, really drawing them away from what their really central contributions are. So that demand really, and this goes to this question of invisible skills of managing and targeting very strategically where and when wants to become part of the debate, the engagement with matters of concern that are part of our lives now. I wanted to share one other point about at one of the things we found at SFU around helping to navigate and support scholars, including myself, is the turn to our faculty unions. And in fact, where the institution has not necessarily been entirely capable of responding to online threat, we found SFUFA, which is the SFU Faculty Association, it's our union, to be engaged and really active in wanting to find ways to address faculty vulnerabilities. It's led to internal discussions amongst faculty colleagues across the university that the university's concern for threat is often focused on the university brand, whereas the vulnerability that many emerging scholars and faculty face is something that labor unions are directly concerned with and engaged with, because their responsibility for our well-being is part of collective agreements. And so that's been a very active and rich way of drawing other pillars into the support communities that Katie drew our attention to, that I think have been really helpful. One other point I wanted to make is that the kinds of support mechanisms that are crucial for our work, part of those support mechanisms has included finding models that help to justify and give academic credibility to new forms of publication and distribution. If I may give one example, for instance, many of us are engaging with and moving into podcasting as part of the sharing of our work. And what we're seeing within feminist podcasting communities, and I'll mention one of my colleagues, the really remarkable Hannah McGregor, in our publishing program here, has led a feminist community of scholars who have developed a framework for academic assessment of podcasting publications as a way of recognizing that for this work to meet the kind of recognition that Mohana pointed to us as one of the struggles of this before, you need a community around it. And we need to draw on collective models that are emerging to give a kind of standing to this work, so that we're not fighting these battles on our own and doing it in a way that's reproducing struggles that have already been engaged and often addressed by others in more rich and interesting ways. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Mohana.
Sure. I think Stuart, Katie, and Javed, they have answered the question I had in regards to what support do I have as an early career researcher that would cover the research. So I feel like I still need more support, especially when I know that in structural way of institutional, how they can change it. It's a huge work, so I will have to think again. However, in regards to how I am navigating the challenges that I am facing as an early career researcher, I would say there are a couple of factors that my fellow colleagues have given me. For instance, the preprint services. So, like considering bioRxiv or MediaArchive, these are services, although these are not peer-reviewed journals, these are researchers who post their studies to give us some understanding about what the researchers are currently doing. Now, I do research on a topic like cyberbullying, and it's a phenomena that doesn't have a definite or consensus definition. It changes with how social media and technology advances, and the definition also evolves. So for me to get in the loop or understand what the new techniques my fellow researchers are using, I need access to these new research. I'm lucky because I'm affiliated to a university, so I have access to vast repository of information in the form of journals and articles. But there was a time in the year when I was not affiliated to any of these institutions because I graduated from UFC and I didn't have a job. So I was totally independent researcher. And at that moment, I realized the struggle I was having as an early career, because accessing those high impact journals with a price money of $38 just to download one PDF, that was a lot. And I was a grad student. So one way of navigating is the preprint services help me. And secondly, some social media networking applications like ResearchGate. I'm really active on ResearchGate because that platform has given me some of the opportunities to collaborate with my fellow researchers. Now, when I post I'm currently finalizing 3 papers from my dissertation, and I'm really excited to share the findings to my research community and the broader audience. But in order to do that, I need funding. So currently in the university, they do have some digital repositories, which is giving us early career researchers an opportunity to post some findings of our research that Stuart mentioned about podcasts. That's something I am doing next week. So in George Washington University, there's a Department of Communication and Media who have offered me an opportunity to have a podcast where I will share my research to let them know it's something that I'm doing. So these are certain resources I would believe that has helped me mitigate the challenge I was facing as an early career researcher. However, if I reflect back to the point that Javed pointed out, which is, visually letting myself known to the community. In order to do that, I may have to use some platforms, for example, Twitter or LinkedIn, to let the community know that I exist. I'm a researcher who's currently doing research in this field, and these are some of my areas of topic. Now, when I do that, particularly for an example of LinkedIn, there are some of my students who follow me. Now, then filtering some of those, how I post, the type of posts I make. Now, I am playing 2 roles here as an early researcher and an educator. When having students on those accounts like LinkedIn, the type of filtering that goes in, that's another challenge. I am trying to understand how I can strike a balance to it. I still have no idea. I would like to hear from you what way I can really balance that, but it's something that still requires navigating. And yeah, that's all.
Yeah. Great, thank you for that. All right, so we'll move on to our 3rd question. And then after that, we'll have the Q&A period, because I'm assuming a lot of people here have questions for the panelists as well. So for the last question, in what ways and what areas do you feel that you and others in your position need further support? And I know some of you have touched on that as already. And then the second part to that question, what about conducting or disseminating research online or supporting students who research online? Would you like to understand more about? And lastly, what further resources or expertise do you need? So for this, we can start with Stuart.
Okay, thank you. I was writing down some things. I'm going to start by picking up from where Mohana left off. I think the challenge that Mohana laid out for us around navigating public and private versions of ourselves with our students is a kind of gateway into a larger set of relationships. And I think, Mohana, you point out to the slipperiness of those relationships, which are affected by conditions of care, conditions of respect, a desire to be accessible, especially early on in our careers. And it's a very challenging kind of dynamic because the invitations to be connected with our students through LinkedIn and various social media platforms are constant and they're ongoing. And as the term moves along, one's desire to care and support one's students often leads one to make oneself more visible to students. And that's a really challenging dynamic to know how to navigate. I think that we need more conversation amongst colleagues and graduate students about that. I know that in my own career, I've made very specific decisions to not allow social media to become a space where students find me and engage me. It inevitably happens, but we also know there are ways to manage that point of accessibility. And I do think there's a certain rigor that's required there that can feel sometimes cold, but nonetheless an important way of allowing oneself to have some space that is not always on display to all the time. I think the kind of support that I wanted to focus in on specifically, and other colleagues will have other suggestions, no doubt, is really about the opportunities that online publishing and knowledge mobilization have. At our community engaged research initiative, something that one of the areas we've really experimented with is moving forward with forms of ISBN linked publications that move outside of the journal and the book publishing format, but nonetheless circulate within academic communities through libraries, through course reading lists, through research networks. And that support to find legitimate, rigorous, credible forms of publication at the Community Engaged Research Initiative at SFU, which folks can look up. What you'll find there is something like now 10 reports that have come out that have a quality like gray literature. And some of you will know that gray literature is often what policy documents are how policy documents and policy research is discussed. We've used this as ways of circulating models of community engaged research, ways of translating community engaged research into policy action for non-academic communities. And the capacity of those forms of publication to reach out beyond our regular circuits is I think one of the most exciting elements of online research and the opportunities it provides. I think of podcasting, Mohana, in this similar way. And I would draw your attention to a podcast called Below the Radar that comes out of SFU, and it's now well over 100 episodes, and a really rich space of multi-audience dialogue about academic work and academic concerns, academic figures. To recognize the need to support that work, to provide both the technical but also the narrative capacity to participate in those spaces, I think is the kind of support that our schools, our institutions need to engage more actively. I also think it's tremendously exciting for a lot of people to be part of those spaces. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. Mohana?
Sure. I think the assistance that I need is quite technical. I am seeking assistance in identifying predatory journals. really, because they often appear genuine, and I usually only notice something amiss when examining confirmation and acceptance rates. So last week, I was looking for some journals where I wanted to publish one of the papers that I'm currently working on, and they appeared quite genuine to me. But in a week when I got the acceptance rates, it's like no reviews that affected, because there are data that I shared with that journal that is data something on my PhD. There's some personal attributes of the participants that I had, and some of the findings that I don't know what this particular journal organization has now authorized to. So as an early career researcher, like I said, at the moment, there's no grant or funding that's supporting or covering the fees. So I try to look for where there's open access, try to look for that's going to support researchers like myself. So looking into journals, which has less fee, like less than $2,000, that's what it was. So submitting my work, it was quite challenging to see like how much data now they have retrieved from that article that I sent them, what's going to be used by the data they have now with this journal. So that's one of the question I have, like, is there a way to assess or identify these journals which are predatory, like they are not the real journal? Because another experience one of my students had recently from the class, she came across a social media flyer. It's about giving an opportunity to the freshmen of the university to conduct research. And the student shared the flyer with me, indicating that this is something she's interested in conducting a research on. And while looking at it, it just somehow, the demeanor of everything of the flyer just made me realize, like, well, don't do that. Because that particular advertisement was asking not only research, but many personal identifiers that I don't think many research or journal would ask in the first instance. So how do you identify a predatory journal, and how do you really differentiate? Because they, to me, seem very genuine. That's one of the questions I have.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm sure some people here have stuff to say about that. But just one note, Mike in the chat said, for reputable publishers, look no further than those featured at conferences at the CSA. So that's one thing. And yeah, we'll move on to Javed.
Well, in terms of what can we do to support and improve maybe engagement with the research resources online, there are tremendous challenges, unfortunately, and I don't want to discourage young scholars and researchers, but there are challenges from the side of, as Mohana pointed out, from the side of those that want to disseminate and want to publish and want to engage as a budding researcher and scholar, contributor side. And there are huge challenges from the side of those that provision information and provision services and are playing the role of publishers and produce the content that the researchers have to have access to. We all know the challenges on the producer side. The cost of some of these journals and the way they are controlled by publishers is a tremendous challenge. There are many events that have taken place recently with big publishers and libraries and big publishers and their editorial boards that have disagreements in terms of the policies and the cost of dissemination and the labor that go in that production process, and the return from that labor. And then from the contributor side, as Mohana pointed out, the mushrooming of channels that target and want to consume your research and want to take your research and do something to it is a huge challenge. Of course, we could say that Possibly some of it could be filtered based on the institution that you have come from and the mentorship and support you have received. But I totally sympathize with Mohana, because the term predatory is a very appropriate term. They are everywhere, and they engage you, connect with you. They want to get your articles published, and they want to provide all kinds of support to you. And you have little recourse sometimes to understand and have the time to do the vetting, but I would say even in terms of the training that's needed today to become a successful researcher and scholar often is assumed that it's part of your doctoral training. But it's not. We as a successful researcher, you have to become a successful educational entrepreneur. You have to understand how to mobilize resources and how to get support for your work and survive, and often have a small family to support along the way. And then you are expected to, set up a research group eventually and gain grants and contracts as quickly as possible. None of this you get trained on in your PhD, and to add the burden of being successful online and on platforms, and present yourself as not just a legitimate researcher, but potentially a budding star researcher becomes even further burden, right? So I would say that those are big challenges in this space, and there are many more, I'm sure, but I will stop here for today. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Katie.
Thanks for that, Javed. There was so much to unpack there, and I love what you were talking about. I mean, you're right. There is one thing about just assuming that, researchers have this public profile, but it's knowing how to kind of package yourself in a way that's very accessible, that's very engaging. We can kind of think of certain media literacy skills that researchers need today that they didn't need a long time ago. And, we could have a whole discussion about those. And again, recognizing that the more visible you are, potentially the kind of greater risk or the greater chance of being targeted you are as well. So it's kind of this double-edged sword. And I kind of wanted to bring it back as well to this idea of the digital defense skills, because I think that is something important. If we are going to teach researchers these digital literacy skills, how to kind of make yourself visible, you also need these defense skills on making people aware that once you have this public profile, there's a chance you are going to be targeted. But I also don't want to assume that just because you have digital defense skills means that you're immune. Just because I know how to kind of block or report doesn't mean I'm not going to get targeted. So having these digital literacy skills doesn't actually necessarily stop the violence from happening. And so I think that's also just really important to recognize, because I can kind of see universities saying, well, we offered our PhD students a digital defense training course. So, the fact they've been trolled, well, they should know now how to deal with it. So I'd be kind of really wary of moving in that direction. But nevertheless, I mean, I do a lot of media outreach, and I'm also privileged in the sense my undergraduate degree was journalism. So I feel as though I have, quite a good understanding of how to talk to the media, what are kind of like newsworthy bits. But there was a call, our media relations person sent it to me. There's a meeting with Scott White, who's the editor. I think he's the editor-in-chief of The Conversation. It's like it's targeted towards grad students and early career scholars on how to write an editorial for The Conversation. Wonderful. That's great. I do think more researchers should be public facing, but I'd be also quite curious about the discussions of what might happen once you get public. And I remember one of the first Conversation articles I wrote, the comment section was awful. And, you know, I write about feminism, so it was a lot of people really attacking us as feminist scholars rather than the ideas. And then, but then knowing after that, okay, now when I write with the conversation, I have to advocate for myself and explicitly say no comments. You know, we will publish this article, but we ask for there to be no comments. But that's something I kind of had to learn the hard way. But anyways, I'm just thinking about if there were these future sessions, you know, these are things that it would be really great, you know, to kind of have like a checklist or just information for people to think about. You know, here's some questions. And again, without assuming that having these digital defense skills is going to protect you, but at least preparing people a little bit more for what they might expect, and then hopefully where they can turn to for support. So I don't have the answer. Those are just a few thoughts on further supports and resources.
Great, thank you for that. All right, well, yeah, thank you everyone for sharing all of that. We do have some time now for questions. So if anybody here, I believe you can unmute yourself to ask questions, or if you want to write it in the chat, feel free to ask and then I can read it out. But yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, yeah, you can just raise your hand and you can do it that way. Go ahead, Stuart.
You know, as questions are coming in, Milena, I just want to add quickly on to what Katie has shared. Other supports, particularly for, I'm going to say this two ways. For folks inside academic institutions, don't ignore TPCs. What Javed was telling us about the invisibility of the training PhDs require, there's also an invisibility in the kind of work that people need to do to participate in online research, as we've heard. And the kind of work that's required has not historically been recognized in tenure and promotion criteria. And that becomes then a site for really active debate and ways of mobilizing institutions to change how they recognize knowledge production. I also think outside of the academy, having as part of work contracts and relationships a more detailed recognition of what the elements of online participation involve, both during work hours and after work hours, seems to me to be an important way of bringing into our working conditions the systems we need to support and enable this work to carry on. So I just wanted to add that on as models of support or vehicles of support for this work for what is often invisible labor. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. And Mike, I see you have your hand up.
That's a cool effect.
I don't think we can hear you, but it does sound like you're in space. So
I know, you know, these
there we
AirPods,
go.
they do make me sound like I'm in behind the Millennium Falcon here. Thanks so much to Kara and MediaSmarts and everyone here. It's such an awesome panel, and thanks to everyone who contributed. I'm in Treaty 7 territory in Calgary. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Sociology. There's many familiar faces to me here. Just a couple of touchstones. I mean, it's such a fascinating discussion. I could get into the predatory journal angle so much, but we have to understand how companies can adapt to this. Like, so for example, I look at corporations that have surveillance-based software that parents buy to watch their kids, and the way they adapt is quite interesting. So I would not be, it wouldn't be surprising to me to see some journals adapt to the criticisms and things like that. There's a lot of ambiguity out there about when I continue to get invitations sometimes from journals that I have, or publishers rather, that I haven't heard about. I look out for some too good to be truisms on there. I look for things like, well, you can submit your manuscript in 30 days. I'm like, not happening, or something of that nature. If there's offer me like a lot of money, that's not academic publishing to me. But there is, you know, I just mentioned in the comments about looking at conference publishers, because they often are vetted by big conferences, CSA or triple SP or ASA otherwise. The second thing is, a number of times this has come up in conversations I attended. I think I was did I host the last conference at the MediaSmarts last year? I think I did that, where it was talked about the emotional labor involved. So if you do have social media accounts and you're using these things, it's not just about the time, but the emotional labor that goes into that and how that can translate out of that. And I think that there's some research out there that has a trauma informed approach. Like research, I know some criminologists who are doing research with particularly, I mean, very specifically traumatized populations. I know there's two researchers I'm familiar who have been interviewing victims of Pablo Escobar, for example. I mean, that's how specific that can be. However, there is a role, I think, for graduate students, early career researchers to get trauma-informed training in some capacity, however that might work for ourselves as well, right? In terms of identifying stress in ourselves as well as participants, identifying stress as well in ourselves as well as post-traumatic stressors that can be unpredictable in terms of when they manifest. So I think that that's an important. But I like to really echo Katie's sentiment about a community of practice. So many times, this is what the neoliberal framework of responsibilization does: is it's up to you to manage these things yourself. But it really puts you in a place of disadvantage in terms of shared experiences, and I think that there's much more work that we can do to create collective knowledge about these experiences, and I think the work of MediaSmarts is certainly doing it here. So my thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Would anybody from the panel like to comment on anything that Mike brought up there? Right. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Samantha.
Nice to see you all, and yeah, thanks for this discussion. I think this was such a great and brilliant extension of the conversations that have been happening around this over the past couple of years, and I appreciate seeing kind of the same people coming together around this conversation. It's really exciting, and I guess just want to start with that's part of the work, and in building that kind of collective narrative about what we're all experiencing is talking about it and also writing about it too. So I've shared a piece in the comments from a friend and colleague, Erin Day. She writes about the intense and violent harassment that she received related to her work on men's homelessness. That was actually, instigated by a group of journalists. So that was kind of like an interesting dynamic there. But I think writing about experiences, with these kind of issues is also important. But I had a very specific question. I'm wondering if those of you on the panel have had this experience. So I am in the first year of as an assistant professor here at Brock University on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples here in Niagara. And what I'm experiencing already is that the minute you kind of indicate that as a scholar and as a potential graduate supervisor, that you have a certain level of digital literacy or digital media literacy, that you then get inundated with a lot of requests to supervise students, because suddenly you're the person with that expertise, that experience, that knowledge, that connection to resources and supports that students might need if they are interested in doing research on different online issues, or just in being online in any way as part of their work. So I'm already feeling as an early career scholar overwhelmed with those requests to be a supervisor for those types of projects, and already kind of seeing that it means that I will have to either say no to a lot of students, or that I will suddenly have a very massive workload as a graduate supervisor. So I'm just wondering if others are kind of experiencing this, and then maybe, you know, how we can navigate it. And I appreciated the conversation around looping in faculty unions, unions and faculty associations, because I think that's part of the conversation. But just, yeah, just wanted to put that out there as something I'm experiencing already.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I wouldn't mind offering a first response, Samantha. I think that one of the things we've done in our school is try to build sub-communities of colleagues who are very intentionally. I mean, I think there's the assumption that these connections develop organically, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. They take time. So we've tried to do them more intentionally by organizing colleagues into thematic areas that then inform, for instance, we have an intellectual currents program, Samantha, where faculty and grad students present on new work once a month. And these sub communities then become blocks of people who will present over the course of a year. And why that matters is because then the question of saying no or saying yes to a student who's come in becomes a conversation with a smaller group of colleagues that can inform, for instance, grad committees and so on. And it reduces the isolation and the sense that as an emerging scholar, approaching mid-career or senior scholars is not. I mean, some departments have odd internal cultures that way. So sometimes you have to really make those doorways open, and that's the intentionality that we've tried to fashion in response to some of the things you're mentioning.
Thank you. Go ahead, Javed.
Well, I think to Samantha, what I can say is just drawing upon my now many years ago experience as an assistant professor. Those early days and months and years go by very fast. You are kind of floating in the air. You are a new prof, and you feel somewhat, I think, rightfully proud to be where you are in your career. But those years go by fast, and in the sense that there probably will, will be a timeline for you in terms of your tenure and continuing status sort of review and promotion. The way I, now that I'm on the other side, so to speak, being the dean of a school, I am super protective of assistant professors. And so I would suggest whoever is your chair or the dean, just to begin a conversation about your balance, your work balance, and how much time you're spending on various things, and if there's a mechanism to provide you some space, so you could even formally count that as service that is expected to some degree, but not as much from, or should not be a lot from assistant professors, then you may work it that way, where you could become a mentor and you can be recognized for that service. But also just to gain some support from your department and from your leadership in the organization in terms of how to really, prioritize your time. And yes, you have to be really good in terms of saying no. So it just goes with the territory in those early days. Okay, thanks.
Great. Any last questions? Oh, yep, go ahead.
Milena, do you mind if I comment on a question Michael Joyce has left in the chat?
Oh, yes, of course.
Uh,
Sorry, I must have missed that.
it's a really good question, and Katie pointed out that the question is, I'm wondering about how you include the kind of knowledge mobilization work into funding applications and whether it's understood by your organizations. And Katie properly pointed out that, in fact, SSHRC is Tri-Council funding is very interested in knowledge mobilization and now requires that as part of successful applications. Um, and I think that's a really important element of recognition of the kind of work we've been talking about today. I also want to say, though, going back to the TPC Tenure and Promotion Committee issues that I raised earlier, that it's those kinds of discussions and the markers of knowledge mobilization work that then become part of tenure and promotion criteria, where you really see a recognition of this new style of research dissemination start to play out. As an example, in our school, we historically did not recognize things like community meetings as part of the time use that would be part of building a network of engagement around your work. That's changed. And now you see in TPC criteria recognition of different forms of practice that become part of the workload that is required of us. And so the work of TPCs is not only about getting online knowledge production recognized, but also the stages that you go through in developing that work. And to be quite honest with you, it seems to me that's where the real legitimacy of the work starts to take hold.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I know we only have a couple minutes left here, so Kara, I don't know if you want to wrap up.
Thank you so much to our panelists for your reflections and comments today. I have lots of thoughts running through my head, and won't get too far into any of them at this time. I think we've had lots of different touch points that we can reflect on. I do really appreciate Michael's question that we just engaged with. I think one little thing that I will add in there is while knowledge mobilization work is increasingly part of funding requirements, as somebody who works, I know Michael does as well, in an organization that is often approached to do that work with others, but the way that we mobilize that funding can be really tricky outside of the academy. And I know there are lots of folks on this call, including our panelists, who have found wonderful ways to navigate those and those processes as well. But that might be a conversation for another time. I just really want to thank everyone for their thoughts, their participation, especially because MediaSmarts is continuing to think about how we can not just support conversations like this, but get, I think, more pragmatically or sort of practically involved in being a resource of support for our academic colleagues and friends. So you've given us lots that we can go away and chew on in terms of how we can provide maybe some more, intentional digital defense kind of skills and training and digital media literacy training for this community. Because I think one of the things that I've heard loud and clear today is our collective recognition of the importance, but also our desire to have a collective community of practice and care. And I do think that MediaSmarts is well positioned to keep hopefully leading that conversation, but also the charge, because I also hear from scholars, I think, across new and sort of emerging scholars, but also more senior faculty as well, that the burden should also not entirely lay upon faculty alone. I think it requires a much broader network of support. So we're really thrilled to continue to be a part of this conversation. A couple of final housekeeping points before we say goodbye. Again, thank you to our moderator, Milana, our co-host at the Internet Technology and Digital Sociology Cluster of the Canadian Sociological Association. We will post this recording on MediaSmarts YouTube channel if you'd like to watch it again or share with anyone who wasn't able to make it here today. Please check out the Media Literacy Week website. We'll put that link in the chat for additional activities and resources that are happening this week across the rest of the week. It's Digital Media Literacy Week. If you're in Toronto, there are some in-person events happening. I believe one is, yes, tomorrow evening at the Toronto Public Library. So if you're in that area, you can check that out on the website. And tomorrow is Digital Citizen Day. It's our second annual Digital Citizen Day where we're focusing on sort of spreading positivity online. There's a whole bunch of sort of resources, prepackaged social content. So if you are looking for a way to engage, you can find that on the website as well. And then lastly, we'd invite you just to take a moment, if you have it, to complete a voluntary post-event survey. We'll put that in the chat. You can bookmark it for tomorrow when you have a moment. It just helps us to reflect on the conversation today, the event, the structure, and the value of it for the community. So if you have some time in the coming days, we'd appreciate that as well. Thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.